Hey, it's Richard here, just at the top of the episode, just to say that recording this episode, we had major technical difficulties, and it's just meant that we unfortunately had to cut out little bits, and there might be bits that are a little bit, feel a bit disjointed, and it's all very ironic because today's episode is about artificial intelligence, so I think the machines know about it and are out to get us.
No, my hide in my welcome to More Than Theology, the Pathways Bible College podcast. Today we are tackling a very current issue, and that is artificial intelligence. And I'm joined by my co-host today. First time I've ever had a co-host, Aaron Hodgson. He's a youth pastor at Raleigh Street Christian Centre in Cambridge. And our guest, our guru today, is Dr. Stephen Garner from Laidlaw College in Auckland. And I've known Stephen for a few years now. He was involved a little bit with my own doctoral research, was one of my examiners, and he and I have kept in touch a wee bit. And he has really got his finger on the pulse of artificial intelligence. He's interested in all things to do with digital technology and media, and he has been teaching at Laidlaw College, as I mentioned. Before that, he was at the University of Auckland. And we just want to pick his brains about what is going on with artificial intelligence. So, Aaron and Stephen, welcome along.
Yeah, kia ora koutou. Nice to be here.
Yeah. Kia ora.
My first question for you, Stephen, is are robots about to take over the world?
That's an interesting question, and that's certainly one strand of the popular discussion. You know, there seems to be, a sense of are we creating something which will cause an existential crisis? Are we creating a technology that will, ultimately replace us? Shades of the Terminator film or the Matrix or whatever like that. At the same time, I don't think we're in that capacity at the moment, but there are certain areas, in a significant areas of ethical use of systems with machine learning and artificial intelligence, which bear some significant thinking about, both sort of in the everyday sort of world, but also in some of those big picture things on, what does it mean to have autonomous drones that might fight wars for you remotely and those kinds of things.
Yeah, it does seem like the hand-wringing is kind of kicked in quite early, but at the same time, AI has become sort of all of a sudden very much on the public consciousness, even just over the last few months, but it has been simmering away, and it's a technology that's been coming for a long time. So what, for people like me who don't know a whole lot about it, like what has actually happened in recent times that's all of a sudden made it front and center of sort of the public focus?
Okay. So probably in the last 9 to 12 months, easy public access to particular machine learning and artificial intelligence technologies has become available. So in the past, these technologies were embedded in all sorts of things. For 40 years, we've had autopilots on planes and planes that land themselves. We've got, mass transit systems that have computer control that shuffle and schedule and move things around. And certainly even back, in the mid-90s when I was doing machine learning research, a lot of that stuff just sort of continued to trundle along in the background. Your Adobe Photoshop or your video editing tools have AI stuff built in, but, it wasn't really front and center. But what we've had recently is public access to what are called large language models. So these are big systems of data. So they've collated, huge amounts of different sorts of texts, both images and written texts and things like that. And then they've got what's called a generative artificial intelligence system on the top, which is basically a really, well, in simple terms, it's a statistical model that figures out how all the different words and paragraphs and things connect together, and basically can do the natural language processing. You can type in your own sort of everyday English. It will then go off to do a task where it analyzes that data and gives you something back. Now, the issue, why it's become quite, disturbing for people is, one, just the sheer amount of data that's behind some of these things. So a system like ChatGPT, has basically everything that was sort of on the internet up until about 2021 sort of piled into it, and digital stuff and things like that. And so that's a lot of data. But also the models are rapidly evolving. So, what people tried 9 months ago, you try it today and it produces something that is, seems to speak with authority, seems to speak with trust. Last night, for example, I was playing with one of the systems, Midjourney, which is a graphic system, and getting it to generate sunset images of a harbour inspired by Auckland Harbour. And I'm getting things out of it that look like photorealistic photos that could be Auckland Harbour, but aren't quite, but, they're inspired by it as well. And so suddenly, people saying, oh, some of these areas maybe that we thought were uniquely human, like creativity or being able to write and things like that, suddenly we feel quite threatened by that. And also a number of sort of professions, everything from, customer service people through to creators and creatives and things like that are saying, well, can I be replaced by a machine that does this? Of course, you've got all the different bits and pieces which are saying, well, actually, look, it's made a mistake here, or, it's completely made up this and it doesn't know about this. But in part, some of that comes about from people actually not actually understanding what the system is. They think of it as an oracle that you can consult and will give you the absolute truth. It's only as good as the parameters and the statistical models underneath it. And it doesn't actually have any inherent knowledge of the data it's giving you. It's just giving you the best way it thinks the data connects together in response to your query. And so that's an interesting kind of thing to be thinking about. But I think it's incredibly powerful. I think some of the stuff that can be done with it is amazing. But at the same time, it does raise those questions around how trustworthy is the data, or, how might people use this, or how it might shape people's lives.
So AI obviously does cause us to think a little bit about what it means to be human, raises lots of theological questions about intelligence and consciousness. So, Stephen, how should we be thinking theologically about AI?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. You can come at this a number of different ways. You might want to come at it and think in general about theologically, why do we create technology? How should we create technology? What's the best way to do that? AI in that case is just simply one of the many different things that are going on at the moment, or human technological ability. Also, though, you might also want to think about what makes us distinctly human in a theological sense as well. And that's a careful exploration. The Bible doesn't really talk that much about, defining intelligence and consciousness and those kinds of things. And often we have, certain things that we think make us distinctly human. Maybe that's the ability to use language. Maybe that's the ability to think rationally, to feel pain or to be aware of others' pain, those sorts of things. And we find actually that, increasingly we see either through the things that we create or in other creatures, elements of those as well, which makes us feel a little less special. For me, the starting point in this is that humanity or humanness is sourced primarily in God. God is the one who bestows humanness on whom God chooses to bestow it on as well. And so, biblically speaking, we have a very sort of general sort of descriptions of what it means to be human, made in the image and likeness of God, male and female, a universality of that, which cuts across, ethnic boundaries, cuts across gender, that sort of thing in terms of humanness. And then that's sort of teased out a little bit with, specific examples, Jesus teaching on loving your neighbor, or the prophet Micah about doing justice and loving kindness and walking humbly with God. Those are the sort of things that then filter into actually what it does to mean about this. So when you come to thinking about something like, artificial intelligence, or, we have some real significant and interesting questions around even the notion of things like intelligence and consciousness and stuff like that, which are just ongoing discussions, whether that's in philosophy, whether that's in psychology, whether that's in medicine, whether that's in computer science and engineering, those things. And often people pick up on things that, they like about themselves, and define those as intelligence. So, the original sort of artificial intelligence researchers in the 1960s and 70s, playing chess was a mark of intelligence because, that was what they were good at, as well. But you might also say that actually there are other sorts of intelligence, the ability to, relate well with people, or the ability to motivate people, or the ability to, put your, look outside yourself and locate yourself in the middle of a wider situation and seeing how things dot together. So intelligence is a bit of a fraught term, but typically with these sort of systems, you're either saying we're trying to build a computer system that thinks like human beings think, as much as we can understand that, or we're trying to create systems that function in a way that appears human-like in how they interact and the results that they get from looking at things, even if they achieve that in different kinds of ways. So for me, starting point is, God bestows humanity, and because the danger with this also is that, we have a huge history of declaring people to be not human. We're declaring women to be less human than men, to be declaring persons of colour to be less human or non-persons, those with intellectual or physical disabilities and impairments to be less than human, a newborn infant to be less than human because it can't make rational decisions and be a citizen, or an older person who might have dementia or something is less than human because, they've lost some capacity that they had before. So I'm really wary about us going out there to try and absolutely nail down what it means to be human, because we've got so many examples of when people have done that and it's gone badly for someone. I was at a talk recently, and the guy who was speaking, who was a theologian, he says, there are no human beings, there are only people. And that's an interesting way to think about it. If you think about people, think about people as, people and persons, rather than trying to define an essence of humanity with, DNA or particular, characteristics, then actually I think that is closer to the biblical way of recognizing the inherent dignity in everybody, regardless of who they are and where they come from.
I want to refer a little bit to a book that you co-wrote with Heidi Campbell, Network Theology. And in Network Theology, you draw on Duncan Forrester, who talks about public theology and the public conversations that go on, for example, about AI. When theology speaks to those conversations, it should be offering something distinctive and something that the conversation wouldn't otherwise have. So what do you think Christian theology has that's distinctive to offer the conversation around AI?
Yeah, so this is public theology, which looks towards the city or wider society and theological thinking and speaking into the public square in a way that's intelligible and credible. So, if you're speaking into that public square, citing scripture isn't necessarily going to get you too far with the people you're on.
Yeah,
so
sure.
you might come across, you might say, well, actually, we've got to find some common ground. And then the principles and other things that underpin your theological thinking come out in that. So with respect to technology and artificial intelligence in particular, what we might start with is, what is our theological understanding of us as culture creators, as creators of technology. And so we actually ourselves develop a very firm understanding of, that vocation that we're called to by God to, in effect, be sub-creators or co-creators, not as God, but as part of our presence here in this world and being placed here by God. And so then that sort of shapes then how we might think about it. So, we might start to say, well, what's distinct about, and it also overlaps with common ground. So we might say, well, how does our understanding of what love of neighbour looks like in terms of shaping engagement with technology, or the dignity of human labour? And that's a particularly strong Roman Catholic strand, where they see that workers are to be treated with dignity and they're meant to find meaning in the work that they do as well. And so that then might speak into, people's jobs being replaced with AI or changed with AI or something like that. And that might serve as the connections there. Access to technology. Is it equitable, or is it only the rich people or rich countries which get this technology? So there's some ethical stuff around that. We might actually also, have a think about how sin affects, everything that in the world in different ways, both individually but also systemically. So, we might actually then want to engage with the power structures that are present and how technology is being used in different kinds of ways. Yeah, so I'm thinking about things like, surveillance and big data and the impact on workplaces and things like that with AI. One of the things that, has come out in recent years, with that sort of theological public engagement has been what's called the Rome Call for Artificial Intelligence Ethics. So initiated by the Roman Catholic Church out of the Vatican, but then in partnership with a number of governments, corporations like Microsoft and others, around setting out some core non-negotiable values for how we engage ethically with that. And when you read it, you can see the theological underpinning there, but the language that they're using is language of sort of a marketplace ethics as well. So, which then others can connect to as well. So, it's aspirational in many ways, but actually you can, as you read it, as I read it as a theologian, I can see the theological fingerprints on it. But if you weren't a theologian, you might not see that as well. So that's how they're speaking into that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, we're you're sort of touching a little bit on ethics, and one of the reasons I wanted to bring on Aaron as a co-host today is because Aaron, as a youth pastor, he's a bit of the coalface with young people and some of the questions that are coming up for him around AI, around sort of ethical use and so on. So, Aaron, what kinds of things are you thinking about and finding with your youth that that you kind of want to put to Stephen?
Yes, there's kind of two spaces when it comes to AI with young people I'm finding. One is I think, what did I just see? Oh, South Park, I think, just done an episode on this idea that, like, you put your essay question into ChatGPT and you get an amazing answer and response, right? And I think there's some stuff going around can't be copyrighted because it's not copyright. But there is some kind of counter measures that I think teachers can use in order to put stuff through an AI generator to find out if it's been generated by AI. Mm-hmm. So that's one aspect. The second one is actually talking to a young person who uses it as a friend. So kind of this artificial intelligent friend who he messages about his day and talks to and things like that. And even he himself knows that it has limitations because I'm trying to think the question he asked it was, do you like me or something like that? And it kind of, I can't really generate a response because my parameters that have been algorithms that have been put in place. But those are kind of two areas that it's really interesting in young people is the idea of fast tracking assignments and maybe skipping the system a little bit. And should we be concerned about that, or should we actually just be training them to use it well? And then that kind of friendship, relational kind of aspect of ChatGPT. Yeah.
Hey, it's Richard here, just jumping in again, just to say that unfortunately this is one of the bits that we really lost, like the first half of Stephen's answer, but we caught the second half, so back to the podcast.
Okay, I guess the second point you raised, Aaron, about interaction with these AI systems, again, is a really interesting one, but there's a couple of things potentially to think about here. One, at the end of the day, it is not a person. So we do form relationships with things, with our car or, with whatever our cell phone or whatever. It's, it's what we do. We anthropomorphize things and that sort of stuff. I think even if the systems themselves aren't genuinely conscious and aren't genuinely persons, we will start to treat them as if they are. And so that's a really interesting thing to think about. I don't have any sort of really easy answers here at this point in time, but there's a couple of things. One of the things, though, is also if you're engaged in a personal conversation with one of these things, then your personal conversation is then going into the database. and then potentially turns up when other people do queries on the background database. So if you're bearing your soul and you're bearing everything else, you don't really want suddenly that information to be popping up on someone else's screen as well. So that's a potential kind of thing. But I will say that there are cases, and certainly this is in the cases around rehabilitation therapy and also therapy with older people, where robotic surrogates have been developed which actually help people in a therapeutic process recover aspects of their life. So, while I don't think ChatGPT is a good psychoanalyst or is a deep and meaningful friend, there may be over time versions of the software that emerge out of therapeutic practice, out of pastoral care, that actually are helpful and provide the privacy and things like that as well. So, it's early days at the moment. I'd just be wary about jumping in and bearing your personal life on something which is ultimately public. And the other thing too is, it's not a person on the other side of it. That's an issue. But then we also still have those same issues with, with social media. The interactions that we have with persons, and is that a person, is that a bot, is that something else here, and that practical wisdom for living in that digital world. So it's always about being careful, it's always about being critical, it's always about asking what's the worst that could happen. But at the same time, I can genuinely see the appeal for young people who are lonely or don't have a lot of friends, or here's something which responds and interacts and makes me feel affirmed as a person, so that's it's interesting that sort of thing comes up as well.
Sorry, were you going to say something, Rich?
No, go for it, Aaron. Go.
I was just going to before I kind of get into my next question, which is kind of geared towards people in ministry like myself, maybe interns at training at your guys' institutions and things. There's some stuff going out now where you can use AI to then generate videos, and you can change the mouth movements and what they're saying. There was one that I saw which was an interview with Bill Gates, and it was like, can't believe this interviewer asked Bill Gates and got a real answer. And you're watching it, and about halfway through I go, I don't think this is right. And it wasn't till well into the interview that I realized that this was just generated because it was in their mind saying the true things, but those hidden things that Bill Gates doesn't actually say. Like, that was the kind of what was happening in that. And I was like, I can't believe he's doing all this. And then I went, wait a minute, this isn't true. And I think that's one of the things everyone, but our young people in particular, really need to be concerned about, not just with engaging with ChatGPT not being real people, but now there's going to be content out there that looks legit and real that unfortunately is not. And that idea of living in this age of misinformation and stuff is just going to get harder and harder for our young people, which kind of leads me a little bit into the ministry aspect of things. Kind of how do we help people in that space, but also as a pastor, like, are there certain lines I shouldn't cross using ChatGPT? So should I be writing my sermons? Is it okay to be using that to write my sermons so that it frees me up for other stuff? Is it, not inspired by the work of the Holy Spirit? Like, how do you kind of engage maybe in that sort of, and I think not necessarily in the way of assisting in writing messages, like, just asking it to spit out certain Bible verses and translations and stuff like that, which I found really helpful in preparing for a camp a little while ago. But maybe along the lines of going, hey, write me a sermon about da-da-da, and it spits out your 20-minute message for your Sunday or your Wednesday night youth group or something like that. How would you see us engaging in that space?
Yeah, so interesting question, Aaron. Are there lines around what we can and can't or shouldn't use these systems for? The different things that you use to prepare ministry resources and stuff anyway often carry with them a slant or a bias. So, as you read a particular study Bible, if you only use that study Bible, you'll pick up the slant of the commentary that goes with that. So, at the end of the day, knowing the basics of your theology and knowing when something actually sounds right, because that's the kicker. Something might actually sound biblical, it might sound theological, but actually it might be completely heretical. But you won't know that unless you're actually yourself are prepared to evaluate those ideas and things like that. I mean, I've one of the things I've heard someone finding it useful for was providing a basic framework for developing some policy within a church context. So they wanted a policy on, something. What are the key points that such a policy should have? And then it gave them a series of key points, which gave them the starting framework for developing a policy around something. So I think that's where it potentially is helpful. Of course, it doesn't have always the latest and up-to-date sort of engagement with data and stuff as well. Maybe sometimes giving outlines around things is helpful as well, or maybe even I would say if you're looking for icebreakers or youth group games or something like that, then it's probably going to have a better success rate because there's nothing deeply theological necessarily about those sort of things in them as well, and that might be helpful for that. I think one of the areas in terms of the image generation side of things, I've seen some people generate some really interesting AI images where they've used the biblical text to do a recreation of an image then in order to engender discussion. So, here are the Israelites in Egypt prior to the Exodus, and have generated an image of them working and stuff like that, and then have used that as a talking point for people to engage with and to think around. But also at the same time, you're weighing this up. Is this actually helpful? Is it not? I mean, I think the biggest thing that I have is, and this is one of my sort of rules of thumb for this is, is what you're doing, is how you're using it drawing you and others towards Jesus, or is it drawing you away from Christ? And that's the kicker. Is it actually bringing people into deeper relationship with Jesus Christ? And if it's not, or if it's just a time-saving tool for you and you don't really care about what it produces as long as you can talk for 20 minutes on a Sunday, then that's not a good use of it, I would say. But if any of these tools, if you're weighing it up, you're using it critically, and to use it critically means you've got to be doing work yourself. You can't do the work. I know youth pastors and others in ministry are often pushed for time at different times as well, and it's nice to have a shortcut, but we do know cases where we find pastors and others who have literally lifted a sermon off the internet and have preached someone else's sermon but haven't said they've done that, and that's then caused grief later on as well, and all those sort of other sorts of things. So I guess wise use of it, I wouldn't depend overly heavily on it for things of life-saving theological importance, but I could quite happily use it maybe to plan a camp or to do some activities or those kinds of things might be helpful. But at the same time, so is actually doing that work yourself and learning how to grow into that and to reflect on what you've done before and stuff as well.
It's interesting you say that. Actually, I was talking to a friend the other day who asked ChatGPT to develop a running plan for him to be able to run a certain amount of distance off-road. Yeah. And he goes, yeah, I did that 2 weeks ago. He said, I haven't even started the plan. He said, it's really good. He just said there's something actually where he's less attached to it because he didn't do the work. And I think, one of the things that was really drilled into me at my time at college and as older preachers helped me in my growth was like the text needs to change you before you can expect it to change others. And so it is kind of that idea, right? Like if you're using ChatGPT to write messages and it's not changing you and it's not coming from you, or you're then you're just reading a script basically. You might as well then just generate an AI video and they can say the message for you at the end.
Well, you basically say, I want to preach a message on this because I've got this opinion. Can you give me proof text to back this up? Rather than actually letting the word dwell in you richly and shape what you're going to say. Just in terms of letting the word dwell in you richly. One of the things that you're probably not aware of is that if you're using a Bible reading app for a reading plan or for suggesting texts for your devotions and things like that, the texts it's selecting are shaped by an algorithm. They're shaped by something like an AI that's picking the text based on what other people are reading often around the world. So it was interesting, a friend friend of mine did some analysis on this, and he saw in the UK how the most, the favourite Bible texts that people had, in light of, using apps and things like that, changed from something like John 3:16 to verses that said how much God loved you and wanted you to have good things. And so there was this reinforcement going on through the app that actually was all about you and what God would give you, rather than on texts which were hard texts, or texts which were challenging, or texts which spoke to mission and evangelism and other things which people found awkward or uncomfortable. So that's one of those things too, even as you're reading the text, even as you're reading the biblical material, just being aware that if you're doing it electronically, what you're getting for your devotions or things like that might also being shaped by an algorithm as well. So, so maybe have a Bible reading plan, but have a look at it and say, well, actually, what are the texts it's suggesting? Why is it suggesting these ones? Are there things there that are missing? Are there things there that my young people need to know about and need to be wrestling with as well? Otherwise, you just end up with a sugar-coated Bible.
So I was just recently at an event put on by Barna and World Vision, and they were speaking to the open generation, Generation Z, and their relationship to the Bible and Jesus, and how it affects the way they see the world and things like that. And one of the research they had found was people retaining biblical information, or even memorizing scripture, drops when you start using an app and you use your phone. And they actually found that people retain Bible scripture with a physical Bible more than they retained with an app or scrolling on an app, which is just an interesting kind of point to add to what you're saying there, Stephen, a little bit around it's shaping the way that the scripture we get given, but it's also shaping a little bit about our retention. And I think that's probably one of the issues with ChatGPT and AI and a lot of software that we use nowadays, is it's, the idea of a smartphone making us dumb in a sense, because it's like, well, I don't need to remember how to do long division because my phone can do it now, or like, do I really need to remember all those scriptures because I can just do a quick Google kind of thing. And so, I guess we need to be careful about the way it's shaping us from that discipleship growth aspect as well, maybe. I don't know if you got any additional thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, different people respond differently to different media. So there will be for some people who the phone will actually be doing a really good job, or the tablet, and at least they're reading scripture as opposed to not.
Yes.
But sometimes maybe the context gets lost, where it's located in relation to other things, how far through the Bible it is, those kinds of connections, because you're focused on a very small window onto the text rather than the bigger picture. As well. So there's those kinds of things, which come into play. Also, I mean, the flip side is as you're preaching, you've got people on their phones who are fact checking you, your sermon as you preach. You say, oh, this obviously turns up in here, and they check to see whether it turns up in here or not, or this anecdote that you're using, or something like that. So. In some ways, there's also a bigger accountability loop when you're preaching or communicating as well, because of the access to information along the way. But the question, of course, always is, with what authority does the information we receive from whatever source have? What authority, what trustworthiness, what veracity does it have? Should I put my trust in this, particularly for life decisions?
Fantastic. Well, Stephen, it's been really helpful. People like me who are kind of noobs in this area are wondering what's going on, and it's helpful to have people like you, fellow believers, theologians, who can guide us through some of this, what feels like uncharted territory, brave new world sort of stuff. So thanks so much for joining us today, Stephen. And Aaron, thanks so much for bringing your perspective there on the ground with young people. Thanks so much.
No problem.